You may have seen some of our earlier videos on how to cut a wine bottle and make a drinking glass out of it. We're going to do another quick video of this just to show you some of the techniques. The most important thing you can possibly do is get a nice clean cut or break out of your bottle. Once we get to the grinding and polishing process that is involved, there are a lot of techniques that are going to be happening over there. But the first thing you really want to do is get as nice and clean a cut or break from your bottle as you possibly can. The more chips that you have from your saw cut or your break, the longer you're going to spend on your grinding discs, the faster you're going to wear them out, and the less efficient you will be. Making drinking glasses or candle holders out of wine bottles is all about how efficient you can be in producing these to get the most money out of them. A lot of people get nervous about using a diamond saw. I'm going to turn this on really fast and I'll show you why you really shouldn't be nervous. Diamonds are only going to cut hard things. Your skin is not hard. A label on a bottle is not hard. So the blade will have a really hard time with those. So you don't have to be nervous about being in and near the blade when you're cutting your wine bottle. Let me show you why. Now you can see our blade's running. I've got water coming, and you can see I can touch the blade. Now I don't want to keep my fingers on there because you can't get friction burn, but the blade is not going to cut you. So it will not hurt your skin, so there's very little need to be afraid of this blade. Now one of the reasons you'll want to try and remove labels from your bottles beforehand is that the blade's going to have a really hard time cutting through a label because a label is soft. It'll go through the glass quite nicely, but it's going to have a harder time with the label, and you'll see that when I start cutting. Now I've put my little block here to give me something to rest my bottle against, and I'll rest it against my backstop so I'll get as even and straight a cut as possible. So I'll have to do very little grinding when I get to our grinding discs to keep this flat and level. Now if you're all over the place with your bottle and you don't have a backstop here or here, you can cut a very odd angle on your bottle, and that's going to spend a lot more time on the grinder getting it level. Your saw cut is important, your break is important. Get it as clean as you can, get it as straight as you can, and you'll spend less time on your grinder. Let's cut through this bottle. The biggest thing to remember is to let the blade do the work. You don't want to rush the blade. The diamonds will do the cutting for you. If you put too much pressure on the blade, you can end up making chips in your glass or breaking your glass. So take your time, let the blade do the work. You'll see I got a little chip out of my bottle here. And that's going to take some extra work on my grinding disc. That was mainly because it had a hard time getting through the label here on the end. Like I said, diamonds do not want to go through soft things. So I had a hard time cutting through the label, and it ended up chipping out my bottle on the back end. Now you'll see on the front end, very little chipping. So it'll be very easy to work with. This is going to take a little bit extra time on my grinder, which is a good reason to remove your labels ahead of time. After our saw cuts, we're going to start using this 12-inch Covington grinder to grind down our bottle's rim to give it a nice surface and move it all the way to a polish so it turns back into clear glass. We're also going to use the grinder with some domes and cones to work the interior bevel and an exterior bevel on this. It's just a slight bevel to take the sharp feeling edge off of it so it's comfortable on the lips as a drinking glass. You'll find out how quickly and efficiently this can be done. So let's jump right into how to use this grinder. The first disc I'm going to start with on our 12-inch grinder is a 140 grit disc. You can start with a 100 grit disc if you like, if you really need to take a lot of material off, but it can sometimes cause a lot of excess edge chipping that you don't really need out of your glass. So a 140 grit's a good choice. This is a fairly worn-in 140 grit, so it's going to be a little bit slower than a brand new 140 grit. but we simply put this on our grinder. We have a 1-inch plug in the middle of our grinder, so we can line up our center hole, and the disc fits down magnetically on top of the grinder. Once the disc is down, we turn our grinder on. You can see it starts rotating our diamond disc. We have an external water feed here. We want to put enough water onto the disc to get it nice and wet at first. And then we want to lower our water usage. Doesn't require a lot of water on these diamond discs, just enough to flush off the ground glass as we're working on our drinking glasses. Now here's our drinking glass that we did our saw cut on. You can see our larger chips there from where our labels were, where it had a little bit of a hard time. I've torn the labels down a little bit because our grinding disc will have a hard time with soft material as well, so you do want to take your labels off your bottles first. You can see our saw cut, which is a little rough. What I'll end up doing is we're going to go straight down onto this disc, and we're going to move from the center to the edge, back and forth, in order to utilize the entire surface of the disc as much as possible to keep it wearing evenly. Every so often I will turn a quarter turn when I'm grinding. This is going to keep my surface level and try and keep my drinking glass level. So let's start. I'm applying pressure downward onto the disc and moving back and forth from the center to the edge. Now I'll make a quarter turn on my bottle. Again, center to edge, back and forth on the disc to keep our disc wearing evenly. Another quarter turn. Another quarter turn. The reason I make these quarter turns is that whether you realize it or not, you are going to be applying unequal pressure to this glass as you grind it. Stopping every so often and moving the glass a quarter turn, you will keep an even pressure on the glass and keep the rim level. So you can see we've already ground down past any of that excess chipping from our saw blade. So my edge is looking quite nice right now. And that's our first step. Our second step is to use a 270 grit disc. This is still an electroplated diamond disc, but it's a finer grit than the 140 grit disc. So it'll give an even finer finish on the surface of the glass. Same technique, fit it over our center plug. And you can see here on our 140 grit, it's a fairly rough surface on the rim of the glass still. Now I've removed all the chips. There are no deep chips in my glass anymore. And that's really the purpose of the 140 grit disc, but it does leave a very frosted appearance on the rim of the glass. This is where the next few steps are going to come in. The 270 grit disc will remove these and make these even finer, and then our smoothing pad will make them even finer still. Again, we'll start our machine. Get a fair amount of water on our disc, then lower the water usage. The finer your grit discs go, the less water you'll actually need. So right now I've just got a steady drip going on this 270 grit. I'll use the same technique again. We're going to go straight down, go back and forth on our disc, every so often making a quarter turn. Now I won't need to stay on this disc nearly as long as I did the 140 grit disc. I needed to be on the 140 grit disc a little bit longer to remove that larger chip. If you don't have any larger chips in there, each step will take significantly less time. That's probably more than enough time on the 270 grit disc to get this surface down to a finer appearance. Let's take a look. This is a bottle that I've done on the 140 grit disc. Still pretty frosted looking. You can see some much deeper scratches in there. This is the bottle we just finished on our 270 grit disc. And you can see while it's still frosty, you can start to see it's a much finer surface appearance. It's almost getting darker because the color of the glass is starting to show through the grinding marks from the 270 grit. So it's a much finer surface. Our next few steps will take this even further. After our 270 grit disc, before we move to our pre-polished 325 grit disc, we're going to do the interior bevel of the glass. And in the Covington grinder, you'll notice we have our little center plug here. We have a spanner wrench that can remove this. And once your center plug is out, we have this 5/8 male-to-male adapter that fits into the middle of this grinder. Now this adapter will allow you to use different types of material on this grinder. The first thing I'm going to show you is our resin dome. Now this is a resin bonded diamond material, so there's about roughly an 1/8 inch of diamond in this dome. With the 5/8 male-to-male adapter in the middle of our machine, we can screw this dome onto the middle of our grinder. Now the dome will give us the ability to make an interior bevel on the inside of our glass. Right now it's got a very sharp feeling edge. Now it won't cut you. You can run your finger on the inside of that. Now that we have ground down this rim, the inside or the outside of this glass will not cut you, but it does feel odd. It feels very, very sharp. And if someone were drinking out of this, it would feel very uncomfortable on their lips, like they're about to be cut, even though they aren't. So what we'll do is create a small bevel on the interior of this lip to try and make it more comfortable. The dome does an excellent job of this. We have a separate valve on the Covington grinder that allows water to come through the middle of this dome. You can see it bubbling up here now that I've opened up the valve. Doesn't require much, so I'm going to take that down a little bit. You can still see the water coming through. Now I'm going to turn on my grinder, and my dome gets spinning. Make sure it gets nice and wet. What I'll do is I'll take my glass, and we're going to put it right down on the dome. I'm not putting it hard, not jamming it on there, but you've got the ability to move it back and forth around this dome. You want to go in the opposite direction that your grinder is spinning. I still feel a sharp edge on there. I'll go back and forth a little bit. It's not unusual for it to make a strange sound like it's grabbing. If it does that all the time, you probably are setting up a harmonic in the glass and you want to remove it. But just move it around on the dome. Make sure to try and use the entire surface of the dome, just like we use the entire surface of the discs. Now the one thing you'll notice on these is that bottles are not perfectly round. So as we use it on our dome, it's not going to hit every spot in there. Now you may be able to see a little bit of the bevel that it's created. It's a little bit shinier because our rim is still our 270 grit and our bevel is a 325 grit resin. So our bevel is a little bit shinier in there, and you can see it. As I travel around, the light's reflecting off of it. And we'll get to certain points in our glass where it's not really hitting a bevel. That's because the glass isn't fully round. So I've got a spot right here, our bevel starts here, but it's not hitting right here on our dome. So I don't have a bevel here, it still feels a little sharp. So what I'll do is I'll put this down on our dome again, and I'll just hit this one spot. Instead of putting the glass all the way onto the dome, I'm just going to put this one area onto the dome. So as I do that, I'm basically just going to move up and down the dome. Now I'm not contacting the glass over here, I'm just hitting this one spot that our dome didn't get to before because our glass is not perfectly round. So I'm just moving it up and down on the dome, just enough to hit that one spot. And that feels pretty good. Now if I've missed it on one side, it's probably missed it on the other. So I'm going to hit that spot real fast too. The diamond domes are very quick and efficient at making these interior bevels. And that feels really good. That no longer has a sharp feeling to it. Feels very good on my finger, which means it'll be very good on the lips if you try and make this as a drinking glass. Another option we have for doing the interior bevel on your glasses is the resin diamond cones. They work in the same way as our domes. They screw right onto this adapter to get just enough water to flow on the dome. Now the cones are a little bit different from the domes. You cannot jam your glass directly on here. It'll grab the glass and probably break it, and if you have a larger glass, it's really not going to fit on these cones as well. So with this, with the cone, you actually have to move up and down the cone and rotate your glass. So you're only contacting one point on the interior of a glass at one time. You do want to try and move up and down the cone to try and utilize the entire surface of the cone. so you don't dig a channel into the resin. If you stay in one spot, you're going to dig a groove into the resin, into the cone, and you're going to reduce the lifespan of your cone considerably. So you do want to try and use as much of the cone surface as you possibly can while you're doing this. But it's just an up and down motion, rotating your glass the whole time. Cones are very efficient when you're doing glasses that are not round. Say you're doing different types of liquor bottles that have square bottles or have corners to them. The cone's going to be much better at getting into those areas than the dome. The dome is really not going to work on a square bottle. You're going to have to use a cone for square bottles and the dome for round bottles. But you can use the cone for round bottles as well. It just takes a little bit longer. You know, I've already made a really nice interior bevel with that cone. Our third disc is our 325 grit resin bonded disc. Now this one's fairly worn in. The new ones are really nice and brown. You can see we've used this one quite a bit. So it's nice and broken in. You can see some ground glass building up along the edge of the disc, and it's not quite as deep maroonish brown as it used to be. The same technique applies. You just center it over your center plug. You can see I've replaced our solid plug. I'm going to turn on our grinder. Same process applies. We'll turn on a little bit of extra water to make sure our disc gets nice and wet. Then we're going to reduce our water flow to nothing but a nice drip. The same process applies as well. We're going to put our glass down. We're going to move center to edge, utilizing as much of the disc as possible. Make our quarter turns. And as you can see, each step takes less and less time. That's probably good enough. Now again, you'll see the difference here. On the left side, this is our 270 grit. You can see it's still quite frosty compared to our now 325 grit smoothing pad, which is much cleaner. It's almost got a sheen to it. You can almost see the color of the glass through this again. There's very little white. Now it does have a little haze to it. It's got a nice sheen. This is a great surface to leave your glasses at if you're going to make candle holders out of them. Once you have the candle in here and it's lit, the light will transmit up the side and make the rim glow. So it's a really nice step to leave if you're making candle holders. If you're making drinking glasses, we generally suggest moving this one step further and get it fully polished. Now that we have our rim worked to a pre-polish and we have our interior bevel that we've done with our dome, we need to do our exterior bevel. Now the easiest thing to do is to do it here on the smoothing pad. And all you need to do is simply roll your glass along the smoothing pad. You don't need to put a whole lot of pressure on this. Let the pad do the work, because you don't want to dig a channel into your resin pad or scrape the top of the pad off. Let the diamond disc do the work, but I'm still going center to edge on the disc to try and utilize the full surface of the disc as much as possible. A few times around and I've got a really nice bevel on there. It doesn't feel sharp at all anymore. And I'm done with this step. When it comes to polishing on the flat lap, we have two different options really. This is a synthetic felt pad. You can see all these tiny little holes in it, these little perforations. We also carry a pad called an LP66 that's an extruded urethane material. Either one of these will utilize cerium oxide for the polishing. Cerium oxide is a powder, comes in a powder form. What you end up doing is mixing the powder with water. Generally we mix it about 1 part cerium to 2 parts water in a squirt bottle like this. You shake it up to get it in suspension, and then you use it on your pad to accomplish your polish. I'll show you how that's done. As with all the other discs, you line it up with your center plug, magnetically seals down on your pad. We'll turn on our grinder. The same process applies with this. We're going to put some extra water on here just to moisten our pad and get it wet. Once our pad is wet, we're going to reduce our water flow again, just so our pad stays nice and moist. And you can see on my fingertips I've got a little bit of cerium already built up on this pad, so it's already coming off on my fingers as we work. Now with our electroplated grits, when we were working our bottle, we were moving back and forth center to edge in a very controlled pattern, making quarter turns back and forth so that we maintained a very level surface and a very consistent grind across the lip of the glass. And when you get to a polishing stage, you actually want to change that routine a little bit. You want to have a very random pattern on this. That'll polish up this area nice and fast because you'll always be changing directions on the polish pad. The easiest way to achieve this is by working your glass in the opposite direction that your disc is running. This disc is currently running clockwise, so I'm going to take our glass and I'm going to go counterclockwise around this disc. Now before I start, I take a little bit of cerium, squirt it into the middle of our pad, and we're going to get going. Now just like our electroplated diamond discs, I'm going to try and utilize the entire surface of my polish pad. So I'm moving from the interior of the pad to the outside of the pad. If I go slower, you can see the routine that I'm doing. I'll start in the center, move out to the edge, go back to the center, move out to the edge. I'm applying pressure on this pad, and I'm moving fairly quickly. Round and around. This is constantly changing the direction of the polish. Every so often, you can pick up your glass, rotate it 180 degrees, and keep going. Just like on our diamond discs, you can unintentionally provide pressure in one point over another. So rotating your glass every so often is a very good idea and will help accomplish the polish even faster. Most of the time, when you get to the point of wanting to turn your glass, it's a good time to squirt a little bit more cerium onto your pad. Before long, your polish pad will actually charge up with plenty of cerium, and you won't have to add as much to accomplish the polish. When you first start, polishing will take a little bit longer because your diamond discs are newer and they're more aggressive, and your polish pad is new and hasn't really been charged up with cerium yet. So we've gone about a couple of minutes, and we're going to take a look and see what this looks like. You can see that is already polished. We've got a nice clear glass rim on there. There's a little bit of cerium and towel built up on there, sorry. But you can see that's a nice clean polish. Clear glass again, you can see all the way through. It's very pretty. Now our interior bevels, you can see them a little bit more now because that is a 325 grit on the dome. But since it is a very slight bevel, just to take that sharp edge off, they're hardly noticeable. Now if you really wanted to clean it up all the way, you can polish the exterior and interior bevel. You can polish the exterior bevel on your polish pad. Same routine, going from center to the edge, back and forth. All the way around your bottle. Now you want to stay in one particular area back and forth because polishing will take a little bit longer than grinding. So you want to make sure you hit the same areas for a fair amount of time. So instead of just rolling it all the way like this, you're staying in one particular spot and just rocking it back and forth. Making sure to utilize the entire pad though. You don't want to dig a channel into your pads and get them replaced sooner than you need to. And you can see that's dug up a lot of cerium off the pad by putting an angle on it. You can see how much cerium is still in the pad. And we'll take a quick look again. You can see our exterior bevel is nice and shiny now. It's like our rim. You can see I've now replaced my center plug with our male-to-male adapter again to show you our polishing dome that we make. If you really wanted to polish those interior bevels to get it completely clear, you can use one of our polishing domes. Now this is a hard structure. It's going to use the same cerium oxide as our small polishing pad. What we generally recommend doing is probably making a paste out of our cerium. Have very little water flow, you just need a little bit to keep the dome moist. To use our polishing dome, You'll generally want to make a paste consistency out of the cerium. See, this is relatively thick. That's just mixing it with less water, so it's more of a paste and less of a clear surface. Now you can polish this several different ways. You can try and put the paste on the inside of the glass. And the same technique, move it around our polishing dome to try and get all the surfaces. It doesn't take much cerium because a lot of it will stay in there. So you just get taking it off every once in a while, moving the paste around on the glass, and putting it back on our polishing dome. You can see there's still a lot of cerium paste in there. You're just taking it off every so often, moving the paste around to that interior bevel again, and back onto the dome. Over and over again. And you can see it doesn't really take a whole lot of the cerium. You're mainly recycling what you've already put on there. It tends to just want to go down into the glass as you work. So you're going to move your paste back up into where your interior bevel is. Once you've worked that, it won't take long for the polishing dome to give you a really nice polish on your interior bevel. You can see how it's shining there. Our rim is nice and shiny, and our exterior bevel is nice and shiny. So this makes a very nice drinking glass. Once you take the labels off, it'll be nice and clear.